Welcome, book-loving comrades, to a sanctuary where the love for reading knows no bounds. Today, we delve into the depths of The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. Your support on YouTube means everything to me. If you enjoy my videos, make sure to give them a thumbs up and hit that subscribe follow button. And if you have any thoughts or questions, drop a comment below. I love hearing from you. Prologue, A Mountain Range of Rubble, and Part 1, The Gravedigger's Handbook. The Book Thief by Markus Zusak is a novel of cruelty, poverty, and hope. Liesel Meminger is a young girl who has been placed in foster care by her mother. Liesel's brother dies en route to their new home, and this leaves Liesel traumatized, causing her to have terrible nightmares in the middle of the night. Liesel's foster father begins teaching her to read on these nights to distract her from her pain. Liesel learns to turn to books for comfort. When the war begins, comfort becomes a rare state of mind, so Liesel finds ways to seek it out. Liesel begins to steal books in her efforts to deal with the cruelty of the world around her. The Book Thief is a complicated story of survival that will encourage its readers to think and to be amazed at how resilient the human spirit really is. The narrator has been watching this one particular girl for many years. The first time he sees the girl is on a train when a small boy dies. The girl's brother. The second time is when bombs fall on the street where she lives. The girl walks among the dead with a stunned demeanor, clutching a book to her chest. The narrator is deaf, and he only comes when someone has died. In the beginning of her story, the young girl is traveling by train to Munich with her mother and brother. The brother is sick, coughing a great deal. Then the coughing stops and the girl, Liesel Meminger, realizes the boy has died. Liesel and her mother disembark the train with 2 guards and bury the child in a nearby cemetery. While there, Liesel spots a book abandoned nearby. Liesel steals the book before reboarding the train with her mother and continuing her journey. When Liesel and her mother arrive at Munich, they are escorted by a child welfare worker to the small town of Mulching, where Liesel is placed in the care of her foster parents, Hans and Rosa Huberman. Rosa Huberman is a rough woman who insists on calling everyone vulgar names. Rosa is not cruel. She is simply vulgar. Her husband Hans is kind. It is Hans who convinces Liesel to take a bath a few weeks after arriving in his home. When Liesel has a nightmare that same night, it is also Hans who sits with her until the terror has passed. Sometimes he plays his accordion for her to distract her from her dreams. Over the first few months, Liesel begins school, at which she does not excel because she does not know how to read. Liesel is also enrolled in BDM, the Band of German Girls, a required organization for German youth. Liesel is also expected to help Rosa collect and deliver the laundry she does as a means of making extra money. Another chore Liesel does is clean the door every afternoon after a neighbor, Frau Holzapfel, has spit on it. Frau Holzapfel and Rosa Huberman have had falling out, and this is why Frau Holzapfel spits on the door. A few weeks after she first arrives, Rosa allows Liesel to play outside with the neighbor kids. There's a soccer game going on, and Liesel joins them, only to become angry when she is told she cannot play the position she wants. However, Liesel meets Rudi Steiner that day, the boy who is destined to become her best friend. Rudi takes Liesel on a tour of town and points out the neighborhood eccentrics, including the shopkeeper who is a passionate follower of Hitler, the old man who whistles constantly, and the street where the Jews live. Rudi is a passionate runner who admires the Olympic gold medalist, Jesse Owens. After watching Owens on television, Rudi once painted himself black with a piece of coal and pretended to be Owens. Rudy's father warned Rudy at the time to be careful about admiring such a man because the Führer and his followers would not understand. However, it is Rudy who does not understand. One night, in the grip of a nightmare, Liesel wets her bed. While changing the sheets, Hans finds the book Liesel stole from the cemetery where her brother was buried. Liesel tells Hans she would like to read the book. Hans agrees, but warns her he is not a strong reader himself. However, Hans spends several months patiently teaching Liesel how to read the book. The book, The Gravedigger's Handbook, is hardly the ideal primer, but Hans sees how important it is to Liesel. Hans begins with simple words, writing them out on sandpaper and illustrating each, teaching Liesel how to read these, and then begins with the book. The lessons continue each night. Liesel has a nightmare and expand into the daytime. Hans takes Liesel to a nearby river where he often goes to play his accordion. On cold days, Liesel and Hans work in the basement so they will not disturb Rosa. In the basement, rather than use sandpaper, Hans began writing the words on the walls with the paint he uses in his profession as a house painter. Liesel continues to go to school, where she has been moved up to the class with her peers, rather than the younger class where she had been placed due to her inability to read. This move is caused not by her progress with her reading lessons, but because Liesel has become somewhat of a bully toward the younger students. Soon after the change, there is a reading test in her classroom. The teacher purposely overlooks Liesel, even though she believes she is ready for such a test. When Liesel protests, the teacher allows her to take the test. However, Liesel cannot read the appointed text and instead recites a section of the Gravedigger's Handbook from memory. This causes several students to ridicule Liesel. Angry, Liesel attacks one of these students on the playground, beating him mercilessly. Afterward, the stress of everything that has happened weighs heavy on Liesel, and she turns to Rudy for comfort. Part 2. The Shoulder Shrug. A week before Christmas, Liesel and Hans finish reading the Gravedigger's Handbook. It is a great accomplishment for Liesel. Her reading ability has come a long way since she first came to Himmel Street, but she still struggles far behind the rest of her class. At Christmas, Hans gives Liesel 2 books that he bought by selling some of his hand-rolled cigarettes. They are a precious gift for Liesel, and she cherishes them almost as much as the time Hans spends helping her read them. About the same time, one of Rosa's customers fires her, blaming the slowly failing economy. Rosa gets the idea that if she sends Liesel to collect and deliver the laundry alone, her other customers will have pity on her and not fire her. From this time on, Liesel spends her afternoons making the deliveries. Sometimes Rudy will come along. Liesel learns how to write letters in school and gets the idea to write to her mother. Liesel asks Hans if it would be okay, and he says it is. However, Liesel overhears Rosa tell Hans it is a futile task since they do not know where her mother is, if she is even still alive. Liesel continues to write the letters. However, once even taking some of the laundry money in order to pay for stamps. When Liesel is caught in this theft, Rosa beats her with a wooden spoon. It is at that moment that Liesel realizes she will never see her mother again. Mulching citizens decide that this year, for the Führer's birthday, they will have a bonfire and burn all the books in town that are vulgar or go against the Führer's teachings. Liesel is excited about the bonfire because she has never attended one before. The Huberman's grown children come for the celebration. Over lunch, however, Hans and his son, Hans Jr., have a fight. Hans does not believe that his father is truly faithful to the Nazi party, and he is embarrassed that his father has yet to be accepted as a member of the party. Hans has applied to the party but has been placed on a waiting list because he once helped a Jewish man whose home was defamed. Hans Jr. is embarrassed by this fact. Hans Jr. criticizes the books Liesel is allowed to read and then storms from the house when Hans tries to defend the girl. The whole episode gives Hans something to think about, especially Hans Jr.'s reference to Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. That evening, Liesel rushes downtown to watch the bonfire. While standing among the townspeople, Liesel overhears someone talking about communists. This word sparks something in Liesel's memory, and she realizes it has something to do with why she can no longer live with her parents. The realization is like a punch in the stomach. Liesel attempts to escape the crowd, but it has become chaotic. Liesel is nearly out of the crowd when she sees a friend from school who has broken his ankle. Liesel goes back to help him to the steps of the church. When the bonfire is over, Liesel waits here for Hans to meet her. When Hans arrives, Liesel asks him if her mother was a communist. Hans says he does not know, but Liesel suspects he is lying. Liesel asks if the Führer took her mother away. When Hans admits he probably has, Liesel confesses to hating the Führer. Hans hushes her and explains that she cannot talk that way in public. A group of men are putting out the last of the bonfire. Hans goes up to speak to one of them. Liesel sees that some of the books have not burned. Cautiously, Liesel grabs a book, the shoulder shrug, out of the fire and hides it under her shirt. The book is still hot, and it begins to burn her ribs. Liesel holds on to the pain, embracing it because it makes her feel more alive. Liesel believes she has gotten away with the theft, but then she feels someone's eyes on her. Liesel sees someone watching her from a nearby alley. Part 3. Mein Kampf. On the way home, Hans discovers that Liesel stole the book because it is burning her ribs so badly she is forced to take it from under her shirt. Hans is not upset and promises he will not tell Rosa. In fact, this and what Hans Jr. said about Mein Kampf give him an idea. Hans asks Liesel if she would be able to keep a secret for him if he ever asked. Liesel assures him she could. The next day, Hans goes and buys a copy of Mein Kampf. Liesel knows it is the mayor's wife who saw her steal the book from the bonfire. When Liesel goes to the mayor's house to collect the laundry, she is afraid the woman will accuse her or tell someone what she has done. The first time, Liesel purposely skips the Herman house, and the second time, she takes Rudy with her. Liesel is frightened when Frau Herman opens the door. However, Frau Herman never says a word. Liesel believes she is safe, that perhaps Frau Herman saw nothing. The next time Liesel goes to the Herman home, Frau Herman invites her inside. Frau Herman shows Liesel her library, filled with more books than Liesel her library, filled with more books than Liesel ever imagined existed. Liesel walks around the room, touching the spine of each book, overwhelmed. It takes Liesel 3 attempts to leave, and when she does, she realizes she did not say thank you. Liesel returns and offers awkward words of gratitude. There is a young man in Stuttgart who lives in darkness, sitting on the floor in fear all day, unable to sleep, unable to move. A friend comes to see him from time to time, bringing him small amounts of food, but these visits are far and few between. One day, the friend brings him a book in which is hidden an identity card and a key. The man is to use these to escape and find a man named Hans Huberman. Liesel spends the summer reading the shoulder shrug with Hans in the middle of the night and reading the books in Frau Herman's library during the day. Liesel sits on the floor in the library and surrounds herself with books, reading a paragraph out of each. In one, Liesel sees a name and asks Frau Herman who the boy is. Liesel realizes this is the dead son of the mayor and his wife. Frau Herman is clearly still grieving the loss of her only child, and Liesel finds herself struggling with the remorse she feels for this kind woman. Liesel also spends the summer playing soccer with the neighborhood boys. Late in the summer, Liesel and Rudy also indulge in another activity, stealing. The Steiner family is having trouble making ends meet since Herr Steiner's tailor shop has lost most of its Jewish customers. The Hubermans are also having trouble since Hans can find few painting jobs. So Rosa makes pea soup once a week to feed them every evening. As a result, Rudy finds himself searching for new sources of food. Rudy talks Liesel into joining him when he goes to raid a local farm with a group of local boys. The raid goes well, and Liesel and Rudy end up with a basket full of apples. They eat them all themselves, rather than face explaining to their mothers where the food came from and end up spending the night with a bellyache. It is a good bellyache, however. Toward the end of summer, Liesel and Rudy find a coin in the street. They go to the shop of Frau Diller, a passionate member of the Nazi Party, and buy a piece of candy. They have to share the small piece, but nothing has ever tasted quite so good. At the same time, the young man has left his dark hiding place and boarded the train. The man is frightened because if he gets caught, it will mean going to a concentration camp or worse. The young man reads the book he was given on the train ride to keep his mind off his danger. The book, Mein Kampf, is not his choice of reading material, but he reads it closely just the same. Another of Rosa's customers fires her and Rudy, and Liesel continue their acts of thievery. One day, Rudy tells Liesel about a young man who goes to the church once a week with a basket full of food. Rudy convinces Liesel to help him throw water on the ground in order to cause it to ice over. When the boy falls, Rudy and Liesel will steal his basket. The plan works, although the boy appears to be more badly hurt than Rudy or Liesel either expected. They take the food anyway, and share it with the group of boys they have been stealing with since summer. The following day, Liesel and Rudy go to rob another farm. However, this time, the farmer catches them. As Rudy climbs the fence to get away, he gets stuck. Both Liesel and the gang's leader go back to help him, despite the danger. This episode brings the three children closer together, but the gang leader will move away just 3 weeks later. When all the excitement is done, Liesel and Rudy sell their goods and go back to Frau Diller's for more candy. Late that night, the young man arrives in Munich and walks to the Huberman home in Mulching. The young man uses the key from Mein Kampf to open the door, afraid of what he will find on the other side, but more afraid of what is on the outside of the door. Part 4. The Standover Man. When Hans Huberman was a young man during World War I, he was in the army stationed in France. One of Hans' fellow soldiers was a young man named Erich Vandenberg, a Jew. This man was an accordion teacher before the war, and he taught Hans how to play. One day, the sergeant asked who had good handwriting. Vandenberg volunteered Hans. Hans remained on base, while the rest of his squad went into battle. None of the soldiers would return. Hans believes Vandenberg saved his life. Hans rescued Vandenberg's accordion from among his belongings and tried to return it to his widow. Frau Vandenberg did not want the instrument back, but accepted Hans' address when he offered to help the widow and her son in any way he could. Today is that day. Max Vandenberg is standing in Hans' kitchen, wondering if he still plays the accordion. Hans has never agreed with the persecution of Jews, and because of this, he has always done what he can to help them, even to his own detriment and the embarrassment of his only son. Max Vandenberg grew up in Stuttgart. As a child, Max was bullied by his classmates because he is a Jew. One of these bullies was a boy named Walter Kugler. Max and Walter had many fights, 13, and most of them Walter won. However, Max was a good boxer and often put on a good fight. This won Walter's respect, and they grew to be friends. One night, all the Jews in Stuttgart were gathered up and moved to concentration camps. Walter came to Max's apartment and helped him to escape. Max did not want to go. He did not want to leave his family, but his mother insisted. Max's mother insisted. Max's mother gave him a name and an address before sending him away. After hiding Max for 6 months, Walter takes this name and address and finds the man who wrote it. Hans Huberman listens to Walter's story and agrees to help if he can. Liesel goes into the kitchen and is quickly sent back to bed by Hans. Rosa then enters the kitchen and warms a bowl of pea soup for Max. Max has eaten so little in the past few months that he eats too much and becomes sick. Hans puts Max to sleep in the spare bed in Liesel's room. The next morning, Liesel stays home from school. In the basement, Hans talks to her in a way he has never talked to her before. Hans is stern, explaining to Liesel that no one can ever know that Max is in their house. Hans says that if Liesel should tell anyone, even Rudy, that the Gestapo could come and take Hans and Rosa away forever. Hans says if Liesel does not want Hans and Rosa to go away, she must keep this secret forever. Liesel agrees. Max sleeps for 3 days. Liesel watches him and thinks how his hair looks like twigs. Max has nightmares just like Liesel, only his dreams come from the guilt he feels at leaving his family to be arrested. When Max finally wakes, he is angry with himself for sleeping in Liesel's room like a guest and vows to never do it again. Hans and Rosa take Max down into the basement and make a space for him underneath the stairs. Hans covers the entrance to the space with paint cans and drop clothes in case anyone ever comes into the basement so they will not find him. At first, Liesel has little contact with Max. Life continues pretty much like normal for Liesel. Liesel attends school, collects, and delivers the laundry even as another customer fires Rosa, and spends afternoons reading in Frau Hermann's library. The weather turns cold, and the basement is too cold for Max to live in. At night, Hans and Rosa allow Max to come into the living room and sleep in front of the fire. After a time, Liesel overcomes her fear of Max and asks him about the book he is always reading. Max tells Liesel the story of how the book saved his life, and this begins a nightly ritual of storytelling. One night, when Liesel wakes from one of her nightmares, she hears Max struggling with a nightmare of his own. Liesel goes into the living room and tells Max about her dreams, and he about hers. Shortly after this, Liesel's dreams lessen in frequency, and she is able to tell Hans it is no longer necessary for him to sit up with her at night. On Liesel's next birthday, she receives another book as her gift. Max did not know it was her birthday and is ashamed at having no gift to give her. Liesel gives him a hug that assures him that she does not mind, he has no gift to give. Max works in the basement for several weeks painting the pages of Mein Kampf and using them to create a new book for Liesel. This book is called The Standover Man and is about a man who has always had someone standing over him. One day, this man meets a little girl who has many things in common with him. This little girl gives the man a gift that changes the way he views the world. Liesel is touched by this book and treasures it among her other, meager possessions. Part 5. The Whistler. Life begins to take on the routine of normalcy once more in the Huberman home. Liesel begins to spend a great deal of time in the basement, sometimes working on her reading lessons with Hans, and sometimes just talking with Max. One afternoon, Max requests a haircut, and Liesel gives it to him, getting it mostly even. On another afternoon, Liesel is once again reading in Frau Hermann's library. Lately, Liesel has been reading only one book, The Whistler. On this afternoon, Frau Hermann offers it to Liesel, but she refuses. On the way home, Liesel finds a newspaper in the trash and takes it home to Max so he can do the crossword. Later, they will read the articles together. One day, Max asks Liesel to tell him what the weather is like. Liesel describes it with as many colorful words as she can think up. This soon becomes a routine between them. Max has very little to do in his cubbyhole in the basement. Often, he will sleep. Max begins having dreams about Hitler in which he is a boxer, and Max is his opponent. They fight each other for hours, neither winning nor losing. Then Max imagines the entire nation of Germany climbing into the ring on Hitler's side and beating him down. Max is nothing, only a Jew, and he cannot possibly win against Hitler. Max begins to do exercises in the dark. One night, he tells Liesel about this dream and tells her that sometimes he wins. Another afternoon, Max decides he wants to keep a journal of sorts. Max enlists Liesel's help in painting over the remaining pages of Mein Kampf to use as his journal. Liesel gets a peek in the journal one day and is shocked by the pain and anger she sees within its pages. Liesel goes to Frau Hermann's again and spends the afternoon reading on the floor of the library. Once more, Frau Hermann asks if she will accept the Whistler. Liesel tries to decline the offer, but this time, Frau Hermann is more insistent. Finally, Liesel accepts. When Liesel starts to leave, instead of giving her the laundry, Frau Hermann gives her a letter for Rosa. Liesel knows what it says. Liesel knows what it says, but she opens it outside the house anyway. Liesel is so angry that Frau Hermann has fired her mother that she returns to the house. Liesel tells Frau Hermann that she is a pathetic woman who has held onto the memory of her dead son for too long. Then Liesel returns the book and says she will never take a gift from such a woman. Afterward, Liesel feels ashamed of herself and guilty for what she has done. Rudy is having trouble in his Hitler Youth division. Tommy Muller, a classmate who is hard of hearing because of a terrible illness when he was young, cannot hear the leader when he calls out orders while the division is marching. Tommy always stops too late or turns late, causing the division to move unevenly. The leader is constantly yelling at Tommy. One day, Rudy intervenes on Tommy's behalf, drawing the ire of the leader himself. Rudy is punished with Tommy, forced to do push-ups. At about the same time, the apples began to ripen on the trees. Rudy and Liesel hook up with the same gang from the year before. However, since the leader had moved away, there was a new leader, Victor Kimmel. Victor is not as kind as the last leader and is not impressed with Liesel because of her gender. Victor allows Liesel and Rudy only one apple between them, and when Rudy objects, Victor knocks him down and pins him to the ground, proving who is the tougher boy. Rudy's trouble with the Hitler Youth Division leader are growing. One day, the boy forces Rudy to do push-ups in a field that has been freshly fertilized with manure. Rudy is becoming frustrated and needs to do something to make him frustrated and needs to do something to make him feel like a winner. Liesel thinks stealing something new might cheer Rudy up. Liesel suggests they break into the mayor's house through a window that is always kept open. However, the day Liesel suggests this, the window is closed. They do not give up and return to check several times. When they finally find the window open, Rudy and Liesel debate over who should go in and who should keep watch. Liesel insists on being the one to go in. Liesel slips off her shoes and climbs into the window, promising as she does that she will try to find some food. Instead, Liesel searches the shelves for the Whistler. Liesel does not find it on the shelf, but lying on Frau Hermann's desk. Liesel grabs the book just as Rudy warns her of movement upstairs. Liesel jumps out the window and she and Rudy run away. However, they have forgotten her shoes. Rudy returns to the house for her shoes, attempting to prove to Liesel how brave he really is. Sometime later, Rudy steals an apple from the market and is caught. Rudy claims that his family is starving and that all their money has gone to buy a coat for his sister. When a customer backs Rudy's story, the store owner lets him go. A few days later, Rudy gets into a fight with his Hitler Youth Division leader. Rudy likes to be insubordinate during meetings. On this day, the leader is still angry with Rudy for being especially difficult at the last meeting. When Liesel and Rudy come across the leader on the street, he takes after Rudy and forces him onto his knees on the street. The leader asks Rudy when Hitler was born, and Rudy purposely answers incorrectly. The leader beats Rudy in the ribs and face, then cuts his hair with a pocket knife, humiliating him in front of all of his friends. A short time later, Rudy joins a new division of the Hitler Youth. An afternoon in December, Liesel and Rudy run into Victor Kimmel while walking beside the river. Kimmel sees the book Liesel is carrying and snatches it from her. Rudy tries to get it back, but Kimmel throws it into the river and laughs as it floats away. Rudy goes into the river and rescues the book for Liesel. Liesel waits for him to ask for a kiss, thinking this may be the one time she will agree. Rudy asks, but does not accept the kiss and never asks for another. Part 6. The Dream Carrier. On Christmas Eve, Liesel brings snow into the basement so that she and Max can build a snowman. Max is excited by this and thrilled that Liesel has given him such a gift. However, shortly after this, Max begins to get sick. Rosa believes it is caused by the cold of the basement and the snow. One day in January, Max collapses. Rosa and Hans put him in Liesel's bed where he sleeps for a long time. Liesel sits with Max, praying he will wake up. Liesel reads to him for hours at a time. At one point, Liesel thinks that if she brings him gifts, Max will wake up. Liesel begins gathering gifts for Max, including a flattened soccer ball, a feather, and a description of a perfect cloud. All in all, there are 13 gifts. Liesel hates to leave Max's side, afraid he will wake without her. Liesel has finished reading The Whistler to Max and decides to steal another book from Frau Herm's library. Rudy wants to be the one to go inside this time, but Liesel talks him out of it. Liesel sneaks inside and takes a book called The Dream Carrier. When she slips back out the window, Rudy is waiting, this time with her shoes. Liesel hurries home and begins reading the book to Max. One night, Liesel overhears Rosa asking Hans what they will do with Max if he dies. They cannot exactly bury him down at the local cemetery. This frightens Liesel even more. Liesel makes Rosa promise that if Max were to wake while she is in school, she will come to the school and tell her. Liesel tells Rosa to yell at her about something to cover the real reason for her visit. A few days later, Rosa shows up at the school and yells at Liesel for using her hairbrush. Max is awake. Liesel rushes home to see him, and he thanks her for her gifts. In June, Liesel is out playing soccer when she sees a group of party members going around to the neighbors' homes. Liesel learns that they are checking everyone's basements to see if they are appropriate to use as bomb shelters. Liesel realizes they will be at her home soon, so she purposely falls down and injures herself. Hans comes out to help Liesel home, and she is able to tell him what is happening. Hans warns Max just seconds before the party man knocks on their door. Max is not discovered, and the party man announces that their basement is too shallow to survive a bomb. Part 7. The Complete Duden Dictionary and Thesaurus. During the summer of 1942, Hans Huberman suddenly has work again. The people of Mulching need to darken their windows as the threat of air raids becomes a reality. Hans has so many jobs that he runs out of black paint with which to cover the windows. As a result, Hans begins mixing odd colors to make a close replica of black. Liesel begins going on jobs with Hans and is amazed at how complicated mixing paint proves to be. Liesel also discovers that Hans is not always paid cash for the work he does. One day, Hans is paid in champagne. Liesel is allowed to share in this drink and vows to never drink champagne again because it could never taste as sweet as it does when shared with Hans. Rudy is busy that summer training. The Hitler Youth Carnival is coming up, and Rudy is signed up for 4 races in the track and field events. Rudy wants to prove to his old division leader that he is better than everyone else. Rudy easily wins the first race, then the second. By the third, Rudy is growing tired, but he wins that one as well. However, Rudy is exhausted when it is time to line up for the fourth. Afraid of losing that one race and being a failure in front of his old division leader, Rudy purposely gets himself disqualified. Rudy is satisfied with winning 3 of the 4. Liesel steals another book from the mayor's house, this time going alone. A few days later, Rudy comes and gets Liesel. Propped up in the window of Frau Hermann's library is a book. Liesel goes to the window and steals the book, discovering it is a dictionary and thesaurus. Inside is a letter from Frau Hermann. The letter tells Liesel that Frau Hermann knows she has been stealing from her library. Frau Hermann is not angry about this, only apologetic that Liesel is angry with her. Frau Hermann hopes that one day Liesel will come to the front door instead of sneaking through the window to visit the library. Liesel attempts to go back and knock on the front door, but discovers she cannot make herself do it. In the middle of the night, the air raid sirens go off. Liesel, Hans, and Rosa go across the street to a neighbor's house to hide in a basement that has been rated suitable as a bomb shelter. There are 22 people stuffed into the tiny room. There is nothing but fear in that room, as they all wait the signal that it is safe to return home. Liesel clings to her books and thinks about Max, hoping he will be okay in the basement of the Huberman home should the bombs fall on Himmel Street. When the signal comes, Liesel races home to be sure Max is okay. Max confesses that while everyone was hiding from the bombs, he snuck upstairs to look out the window. It is the first time Max has seen the sky in nearly 2 years. Another raid takes place a few weeks later. Everyone is frightened and there is much tension in the bomb shelter. Liesel takes out one of her books and begins to read aloud. Soon, everyone grows quiet and listens. Liesel reads until the signal comes that all is well. A few days later, Frau Holzapfel comes to the Huberman house and speaks to Rosa for the first time in many years. Frau Holzapfel liked the story Liesel read in the shelter so much that she is willing to trade her coffee rations if Liesel will come read to her several afternoons a week. Rosa agrees and sends Liesel over right away. A couple of weeks later, a truck carrying Jewish prisoners to Dachau breaks down outside of Mulching. The soldiers decide to march the prisoners through town. One of the soldiers is an old man who is starving and near death. Hans Huberman is among the Mulching townspeople watching this procession. Hans cannot stand by and watch this poor man suffer. Hans takes a piece of bread from his lunchbox and offers it to the dying man. A soldier sees this and beats both the prisoner and Hans with his whip. Hans does not realize the magnitude of his actions until it is over. Many people from town have seen what happened. Hans knows the Gestapo will soon come to arrest him, and when they do, they will search the house. They will find Max. Hans tells Max he has to leave. Part 8. The Word Shaker. Rudy comes home one night and finds that 2 men have come to speak to his parents about him. Rudy is not allowed to attend this meeting and chooses not to eavesdrop on the conversation. Later, Rudy learns that the men wanted him to attend a special school for Nazi youths. Rudy's parents have heard stories about these schools and do not want to allow Rudy to go. When Rudy relates this story to Liesel later, he tells her how the people from the school heard about Rudy winning so many races, so they sent a doctor to check him out for physical fitness. Rudy was forced to get naked in front of the doctor. a nurse, a school official, and two other boys also being examined at the same time. It was humiliating, and it was an experience that would stick with him. It is also a story that caused Liesel to have thoughts of Rudy she never has had before. Hans waits weeks for his punishment to come for helping the starving Jew. However, instead of a knock on the door, Hans receives a letter telling him he has been accepted into the Nazi Party. The following day, Hans receives another letter informing him he is expected to join the military to help defend Germany in the war. At the same time, the Steiner family learns that Rudy's father is also expected to join the military as punishment for not allowing his son to enter the special school. The night before he is due to go to boot camp, Hans and Herr Steiner get drunk. When Hans comes home, he accidentally goes to the wrong house and awakens Frau Holzapfel. The next morning, Rosa is forced to wake Hans with a bucket of water. At the train station, it is a sad sight as Liesel and Rosa say their goodbyes. A short time later, after Herr Steiner has gone as well, Rudy decides to run away. Liesel goes with him. They walk until they reach the outskirts of town. Rudy tells Liesel that he feels responsible for his father having to leave. Rudy confesses to hating Hitler. When Rudy has released all his anger, he and Liesel return to town to face the anger of their mothers. A few nights later, Liesel wakes in the middle of the night and hears Hans' accordion. Believing he has come home, Liesel rushes out to the living room. However, Liesel only finds Rosa sitting on her bed with the accordion strapped to her chest. Herr Steiner is assigned to repairing the many uniforms the soldiers damage every day after his training. Hans is assigned to a unit called the LS. This unit goes into bomb-damaged areas to put out fires and shore up damaged buildings. It is a very dangerous assignment, but Hans learns quickly how to survive. Hans proves to be a valuable member of the squad. However, Hans sees so much pain and destruction every day that he cannot bring himself to write letters home to Liesel and Rosa, afraid he will give something away about his job and cause them unnecessary pain. The parade of Jewish prisoners through mulching continues. One day, Rudy and Liesel decide to lay bread out along the road for the prisoners to eat. Then they hide in the trees to watch. Liesel is more intent in her study of the prisoners because she suspects she might one day see Max among these people. In her intensity, Liesel stands too far out among the trees and is chased away by a guard. A few days before Christmas, Rosa gives Liesel the journal Max kept while living in their basement. In the book is a story called The Word Shaker. This story is a fictional account of a young woman whose job it is to shake words out of trees for Hitler. One day, the word shaker took the tears she shed for a young Jewish man and used it to plant a tree. When the tree grew, the word shaker climbed into it and watched as many people attempted to cut it down. No one could cut the tree down. Finally, the Jewish man returns. The Jewish man climbs the tree and joins the word shaker. Now the axe marks are visible on the tree and it begins to bend. The Jewish man and the word shaker leave the tree, confident that it can never be broken. After reading the book many times, Liesel pulls herself away from it long enough to give Rudy a gift. Liesel takes Rudy to his father's tailor shop and gives him a suit. Part 9. The Last Human Stranger. A few weeks after Christmas, Liesel and Rudy return to the mayor's house in order to steal a new book. Liesel finds a plate full of Christmas cookies waiting on Frau Hermann's desk. Liesel hands the cookies out the window to Rudy and then grabs a new book. Before Liesel can get out the door, Frau Hermann comes into the room. Liesel asks her if this library is hers. Liesel is surprised when Frau Hermann admits it is her room, but that Liesel is the only person getting any use out of it lately. An awkward moment passes between Liesel and Frau Hermann before Liesel slips out the window. Liesel and Rudy share the cookies while Hans is outside the town of Essen. The Elsmen are playing cards when one of them becomes angry when he loses. In January, Liesel arrives at Frau Holzapfel's house and finds a young man there with her. It turns out the young man is one of Frau Holzapfel's sons. Frau Holzapfel had 2 sons who went to war. Only one has returned. One died in a hospital outside Stalingrad with his brother by his side. Frau Holzapfel says Liesel cannot read to her when she first arrives. The son Michael comes to get Liesel later, but when she arrives, Frau Holzapfel is unresponsive. This episode increases Liesel's concern for Hans. At the same time, Liesel is saddened because she feels that she cannot steal from Frau Hermann anymore. Liesel returns the plate to the Hermann home, leaving it at the front door, and walks away. A few weeks after the poker game, Hans and the other members of his squad are climbing into their truck after a long day of work. The disgruntled poker player insists on riding in Hans's seat for reasons he does not make clear. Rather than argue, Hans allows this change. A few minutes into the trip back to camp, however, the truck blows a tire and crashes. When everyone climbs out of the truck and begin to check each other for injuries, they discover the disgruntled poker player has died. Once again, Hans's life has been spared. However, Hans has broken his leg. His commander tells Hans that he will recommend he be sent home. When Hans finally writes a lengthy letter home, it is full of news of his homecoming. Hans will be home in April. Rudy packs a toolbox with things he imagines he might need to break into a house and has decided to break into one of the fancy homes on the rich side of town. Rudy wants to punish these people who he sees as responsible for his father having to go off to war. Liesel accompanies Rudy as he walks up the street, trying to pick his target. The longer Rudy walks, the more Liesel realizes he will not rob any of these houses. Rudy goes as far as taking off his shoes and socks, but then decides it is time to go home. Rudy grabs his shoes and leaves his socks in the street, a gift to his potential victims. A few weeks later, when an air raid is called, Michael Holzapfel comes to the Hubermans and tells them his mother will not go to the shelter. Rosa goes to Frau Holzapfel and tries to bully her into leaving, but has no success. Liesel tries, but Frau Holzapfel is unresponsive. Finally, Rosa, Liesel, and Michael go to the shelter and leave Frau Holzapfel in her home. Michael becomes despondent at the thought of his mother remaining behind. Michael feels as though he should have stayed with her. Frau Holzapfel finally arrives in the shelter and comforts her son. The neighbors remain in the shelter for hours while Liesel reads. When the signal finally comes releasing the neighbors from the shelter, Rudy runs outside and sees a fire in the distance. Rudy and Liesel run toward the fire to see what it is. When they arrive, they discover an American airplane has crashed beside the river. Inside is the pilot, severely injured. Rudy tries to protect Liesel from the sight, but she is determined to see. As the pilot dies, Rudy gives him a teddy bear to help comfort his final moments. Part 10. The Book Thief. Hans's homecoming is a happy time in the Huberman home. Hans plays his accordion and settles into his desk job in Munich. The only shadow on his homecoming is the news of the death of Frau Holzapfel's son, and the knowledge that the Hubermans' own son is fighting in Stalingrad. The parade of Jewish prisoners continues through town. Every time they march, Liesel watches for Max Vandenberg. In July, the body of Michael Holzapfel is found hanging in a shop downtown. Michael left a note apologizing to his mother and confessing that he could not live with himself for wanting to live while his brother lies in a grave. Hans Huberman is the one to give the news to Frau Holzapfel. It happens finally. Liesel is watching the prisoners being marched through town, and she recognizes one of the faces. Max Vandenberg. Liesel calls to him and joins the ranks of the prisoners, marching at his side. A soldier grabs her and pushes her away, but Liesel returns. Max tells her how he got caught a few months ago on his way to Stuttgart. Max is okay for the time being. Liesel wants to stay with him, stay by his side to be sure he is safe. The soldier grabs Liesel again and beats her with his whip. Rudy sees what is happening and he grabs Liesel, pulling her to safety. Liesel fights Rudy at first, but then allows him to help her. Later, Liesel tells Rudy all about Max and the time he spent hiding in her basement. A week later, Liesel sneaks into Ilse Hermann's library for the final time. Liesel is overcome with anger and grief while reading a book, so she tears the book to shreds. Overcome with remorse, Liesel writes a letter to Frau Hermann apologizing for the damage. Liesel also says goodbye, imagining she will never see Frau Hermann again. Frau Hermann is so touched by the letter that she comes to Himmel Street and gives Liesel a blank book. Frau Hermann tells Liesel she has a gift for writing, and she should use the book to write down her story. Liesel goes into the basement that night and begins to write. Every night, Liesel writes a new chapter, filling the pages over the next 10 days. Liesel calls the book The Book Thief. On the 10th night, there is an air raid. This one is a mistake, and it comes so quickly that there is no time to warn anyone. The bombs fall on Himmel Street, destroying homes while people sleep. Liesel survives because she is in the basement. Liesel is the only survivor. Liesel walks along the street in shock and watches as the bodies of her friends and neighbors are pulled from the ruins. Liesel finds Hans and Rosa. Liesel sits beside their bodies, holding her papa for a long time. The accordion is discarded and Liesel grabs it, giving it back to Hans for the last time. Liesel finds Rudy's body too, and finally gives him the kiss he has asked for so often. Liesel is finally led away. The book thief is left in the street, forgotten. Epilogue, the last color. Liesel is taken to the police station, where Frau Hermann comes and takes her home. Liesel is in shock and refuses to take a bath or to eat. Frau Hermann cares for Liesel the best she can. Herr Steiner returns from the war upon the news of his family's deaths. Liesel and Herr Steiner forge a close friendship in their mutual grief. Liesel begins to work for Herr Steiner in his tailor's shop. It is here that Max finds her when the war has ended. Liesel dies in Sydney, Australia, an old woman with her children around her. When death comes for her soul, Liesel is waiting. Death shows Liesel the book thief. Death shows Liesel the book thief. Death has carried it around in his pocket since he found it discarded that day in mulching. Death has hoped that its words can help him understand human behavior. Liesel asks if the book has helped. Death admits that it has not. Death admits that it has not. Death feels as though he is haunted by humans.